When both pilots collapsed unconscious at 37,000 feet, panic gripped the cabin. 150 passengers faced certain death. But hidden among them sat a child with secrets no adult would believe. Someone unexpected, someone too young to trust with lives, yet the only one who could save everyone or doom them all. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The morning sun cast long shadows across the terminal at Denver International Airport as 11-year-old Maya Rodriguez walked beside the flight attendant through the boarding gate, her small backpack bouncing against her shoulders with each step. She wore her favorite purple hoodie over jeans, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and to anyone watching she looked like any other elementary school kid traveling alone during spring break. The flight attendant, a woman named Sarah with kind eyes and a warm smile, kept glancing down at her with that special concern adults reserve for unaccompanied minors, making sure this young passenger felt comfortable and safe. Maya carried a worn tablet covered in stickers of cartoon characters, a bag of gummy bears peeking out from her backpack side pocket, and she had the look of a child who was nervous about flying alone but trying to be brave about it. Other passengers smiled at her as she passed, the way adults do when they see a kid traveling by themselves, probably thinking about their own children or grandchildren. Nobody could have guessed that behind those 11-year-old eyes lay thousands of hours of aviation knowledge, flight simulator experience, and emergency procedure training that would soon become the difference between life and death for everyone aboard Flight 447. The Boeing 737 was scheduled for a routine 3-hour flight from Denver to Chicago O'Hare, carrying 150 souls including crew members. Maya found her window seat in row 12, settling in with the careful movements of a child who had been taught airplane etiquette. The middle-aged businessman in the aisle seat barely glanced at her before returning to his laptop, while the elderly woman in the middle seat gave her a grandmotherly smile and asked if this was her first time flying alone. Maya shook her head politely and said she was going to visit her aunt in Chicago, which was true, though she left out the part about why she was traveling alone and what had happened 6 months ago. Sarah came by one more time before takeoff, bending down to Maya's eye level the way adults do when talking to children. "Now sweetie, if you need anything during the flight, anything at all, you just press this button right here, okay?" She pointed to the call button above Maya's seat with exaggerated slowness, as if explaining something complicated to someone very young. "Do you need me to show you how the seatbelt works? And see this card in the seat pocket? It shows you where the exits are, but don't worry, flying is super safe. You're going to have a great flight." Maya nodded and smiled, the practiced smile of a child who had learned to let adults underestimate her. She had fastened countless seatbelts in flight simulators that her father had built in their garage, knew every emergency exit procedure by heart, and could recite the Boeing 737 operations manual from memory. But she just said, "Thank you," in a small voice and pulled out her tablet, because that's what was expected of an 11-year-old traveling alone. The engines roared to life and the plane pushed back from the gate. Maya felt the familiar vibration through her seat, automatically identifying it as the auxiliary power unit engaging, then the main engine spooling up to taxi power. She watched through the window as the ground crew guided them away, seeing the wing flaps extend for takeoff configuration, noting the angle and position with the train that her father had taught her to have. To everyone else, she was just another kid staring out the window with wonder, maybe a little scared, definitely innocent. Captain James Morrison sat in the left seat of the cockpit, a veteran pilot with 23 years of experience and over 15,000 flight hours. He was 54 years old, happily married with 3 kids of his own, and he prided himself on running a safe, professional flight deck. His first officer, 29-year-old Derek Chen, was relatively new to the airline but had quickly proven himself as a capable co-pilot. They ran through their pre-flight checklist with the easy rhythm of professionals who had done this thousands of times before. "Beautiful morning for flying," Captain Morrison said as they received clearance for takeoff. The 737 accelerated down the runway, the nose lifted, and Flight 447 climbed smoothly into the clear Colorado sky. In the cabin, passengers settled in for the journey, some reading, some sleeping, some working on laptops. Maya had her tablet open to what looked like a game, but was actually a flight simulator program her father had given her, one that used real Boeing systems and procedures. She wasn't playing it now, just holding it, thinking about him. 6 months ago, her father, Captain Miguel Rodriguez, had died in a car accident on his way home from the airport. He had been a pilot for 20 years, had flown everything from small Cessnas to jumbo jets, and from the time Maya could walk, he had been teaching her about flying. Not just the fun parts, not just the cool facts that kids love, but the real knowledge, the emergency procedures, the crisis management, the split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. Maya, mi hija, he would say, flying isn't just about the good days. It's about knowing what to do when everything goes wrong. He made her practice on simulators for hours, not the simple games but the professional-grade software that airlines use to train their pilots. He taught her how to read instruments, how to communicate with air traffic control, how to handle engine failures, hydraulic problems, electrical issues. He made her learn emergency landing procedures over and over until she could do them in her sleep. Her mother thought it was too much, that Miguel was treating their daughter like a pilot in training rather than a little girl. But her father would smile and say, knowledge is never wasted, and you never know when it might save your life or someone else's. After he died, Maya kept studying, kept practicing on the simulator, because it made her feel close to him. She knew things that most adult pilots took years to learn. She understood the 737 systems better than some first officers. But she was 11 years old, and nobody took 11-year-olds seriously when it came to flying passenger jets. The flight progressed normally for the first hour. The seatbelt sign turned off, flight attendants began beverage service, and the plane cruised at 37,000 feet over the Kansas plains. Maya accepted a ginger ale from Sarah, who asked if she was doing okay and reminded her that Chicago wasn't too far away now. The businessman beside her made a phone call using the airplane Wi-Fi, complaining loudly about some business deal. The elderly woman dozed peacefully. Everything was perfectly routine, perfectly normal, until it suddenly wasn't. In the cockpit, Captain Morrison had just taken a sip of coffee when he felt a strange sensation in his chest. A tightness, like someone was squeezing his heart. He put down the coffee cup, his hand shaking slightly. "Derek," he said, his voice strained, "I'm not feeling well." First Officer Chen looked over in concern as the captain's face went pale, then gray. Sweat broke out on Morrison's forehead. "Chest pain," he managed to say. "Bad. Really bad." Derek immediately reached for the radio. "Denver Center, Flight 447 requesting priority handling. Captain is experiencing a medical emergency." But even as he spoke, he began to feel it too. A crushing sensation in his chest, his left arm going numb, the textbook symptoms that every pilot dreaded, the coffee, they both realized in the same horrible instant. Something was wrong with the coffee. The flight attendant who had brought it had looked sick herself, had mentioned feeling dizzy. Food poisoning, contamination, something had gotten into the crew meals and it was hitting them all at once. Captain Morrison slumped forward in his harness, unconscious. Derek tried to fight it, tried to stay alert, but the pain was overwhelming. He managed to activate the autopilot's emergency mode before his vision tunneled and he too fell unconscious, his head lolling to the side. In the span of 90 seconds, Flight 447's entire flight crew had been incapacitated, leaving a Boeing 737 with 150 passengers cruising on autopilot with nobody conscious in the cockpit. Sarah the flight attendant discovered them 3 minutes later when she brought more coffee and knocked on the cockpit door without getting a response. She used her emergency access code and opened the door to find both pilots unconscious in their seats. Her scream brought the other flight attendants running. Mark, the senior flight attendant, pushed past her and tried to rouse the pilots, shaking Captain Morrison's shoulder, calling his name, getting no response. He checked for pulses and found them, weak and thready but there. Both men were alive but completely unconscious. The announcement came over the intercom, Sarah's voice shaking with barely controlled panic. "If there are any pilots on board, any pilots at all, please identify yourself immediately. We have an emergency. The word sent a wave of terror through the cabin. Passengers looked at each other with growing horror, the implications sinking in. Both pilots down. No one flying the plane. They were going to die. People started crying, some screaming, others praying. Cell phones came out as passengers tried to call loved ones to say goodbye. The businessman beside Maya was frantically texting his wife, tears streaming down his face. Maya sat frozen in her seat, her heart pounding. She knew exactly what was happening in the cockpit. She knew the autopilot was flying the plane but couldn't land it. She knew that without a pilot, the plane would eventually run out of fuel and crash. She knew that she might be the only person on this aircraft with any real aviation knowledge. But she was 11 years old. Who would listen to an 11-year-old? Sarah came running through the cabin, desperately looking at every passenger. Is anyone a pilot? Anyone with any flying experience at all? Men and women shook their heads, some too terrified to even speak. Someone has to help us, Sarah sobbed. Someone has to land this plane. Maya's hands were shaking. Every instinct told her to stay quiet, stay in her seat, let the adults handle it. But her father's voice echoed in her head, the lessons he had drilled into her 1,000 times. When there's an emergency, you do what needs to be done. You don't worry about what people think. You don't worry about being scared. You act. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, her voice small but clear. I know how to fly. Sarah looked at her, looked at this tiny 11-year-old girl in a purple hoodie, and didn't understand at first. Sweetie, I need an adult. I need a real pilot. The words weren't meant to be cruel, but they hit Maya like a slap. She wasn't real. She wasn't enough. But she spoke again, louder this time. My father was Captain Miguel Rodriguez. He flew 737s for 20 years. He taught me everything. I've done thousands of hours on flight simulators. I know the emergency procedures. I can try to land this plane. The businessman had overheard and he laughed, a hysterical, terrified laugh. You want to let a kid fly the plane? Are you insane? She's a child. She probably just plays video games. Other passengers were shouting now, some agreeing that it was crazy, others saying what choice did they have, everyone talking at once in rising panic. Sarah looked at Maya, looked at her young face, and felt the weight of an impossible decision. Let this child try, or wait for everyone to die. Mark pushed through the crowd, his face grim. There's no one else. Air traffic control is on the radio. They're trying to find a pilot on the ground who can talk us through it, but without someone in the cockpit who understands the instruments, who can actually fly the plane, we're dead. All of us. He looked at Maya, really looked at her. Can you really do this? Maya thought of her father, of all the nights in the garage simulator, of all the emergency scenarios he had made her practice. Engine failures at rotation, hydraulic malfunctions, electrical fires, instrument failures, he had thrown everything at her and made her solve it. Land this plane like your life depends on it, he would say, because someday, it might. She looked up at Mark and nodded. I can try. I have to try. They brought her to the cockpit, and the sight that greeted her was something from a nightmare. Captain Morrison was still slumped in his harness, breathing but unconscious, his face gray. First Officer Chen was the same, his eyes rolled back. The autopilot was engaged, keeping the plane straight and level, but the fuel gauges showed they had maybe 90 minutes of flying time left. Maya climbed into the observer's seat behind the pilots, her feet barely reaching the floor, and looked at the instrument panel. It was like coming home. Every gauge, every switch, every display was exactly where her father had taught her it would be. She understood this machine. Mark strapped her in and handed her a headset. Air traffic control is on frequency 121.5. They're waiting. Maya's hands shook as she put on the headset, the earpieces too big for her small head, but she adjusted them and keyed the microphone. Denver Center, this is Flight 447. The pilots are unconscious. I'm 11 years old but I've been trained on 737 systems. I need help to land this aircraft. Her voice cracked on the last word, betraying her fear. There was a long pause, and then a calm male voice came back. Flight 447, Denver Center. I copy you have an emergency situation with both pilots incapacitated. Confirm you are 11 years old. Another pause, and Maya could almost hear the controller thinking this had to be some kind of nightmare scenario. What is your name and what training do you have? My name is Maya Rodriguez. My father was Captain Miguel Rodriguez. He taught me to fly on professional simulators since I was 6 years old. I know the 737 systems. I know emergency procedures. I've practiced landing approaches hundreds of times. I know this is crazy but I'm all they have. She was talking fast, words tumbling out, trying to convince this stranger on the radio that she could do the impossible. Maya, my name is Tom Harrison and I'm going to help you through this. The controller's voice was steady, professional, but she could hear the strain underneath. We're getting a 737 instructor pilot here right now to talk you through every step. Can you read the instruments? Tell me your current altitude, airspeed, and heading. Maya scanned the primary flight display, reading off the numbers exactly as her father had taught her. Altitude 37,000 feet, airspeed 280 knots, heading 090 degrees. She knew what each number meant, knew the plane was flying fast and high, knew that landing meant slowing down and descending in a precise, controlled way that took years of training to master. Good, Maya, that's perfect. You're doing great. Tom's voice was warm, encouraging, treating her like a real pilot. We're going to bring you down to Chicago O'Hare. The weather is clear, winds are calm, and we're going to guide you through every single step. Another pilot named Captain Sarah Chen is here with me now. She's a 737 training captain and she's going to talk you through the approach and landing. Can you do this, Maya? Maya looked at the unconscious pilots, thought about the 150 people in the cabin behind her, thought about her father and everything he had taught her. I can do this, she said, and meant it. Captain Chen's voice came over the radio, calm and confident. Maya, I'm going to be your co-pilot from the ground, okay? First thing, I need you to check that the autopilot is engaged. You should see an AP light illuminated on the mode control panel. Autopilot is engaged, showing LNAV and VNAV modes, Maya reported, using the proper terminology. She heard Captain Chen's small intake of breath, realizing this kid actually knew what she was talking about. Fuel remaining shows 8,200 pounds. That gives us about 75 minutes of flying time. Perfect, Maya. That's plenty of time. We're going to do this step by step, nothing rushed. First, I need you to program Chicago O'Hare into the flight management computer. Have you done this before on a simulator? Maya had done it 100 times. She reached forward to the FMC, her small fingers working the keys, entering ORD for O'Hare, selecting runway 28 right, which Captain Chen specified as the longest runway with the best approach. The magenta line on the navigation display shifted, showing the new route. Course set for O'Hare, runway 28 right, she reported. Behind her, Mark and Sarah stood in the cockpit doorway, watching this tiny girl work controls that seemed impossibly complex. In the cabin, passengers had gone quiet, listening to the engines, to every sound, wondering if that little girl up front could really save them. Some were praying, some were holding hands with strangers, some were writing final messages on their phones just in case. The businessman who had laughed at Maya was crying silently, ashamed of himself, hoping desperately that he was wrong about her. Captain Chen guided Maya through the descent planning. We're going to start coming down in about 10 minutes. When I tell you, you're going to dial the altitude selector down to 24,000 feet and press the altitude intervention button. The plane will start descending on its own. Have you practiced this? Maya confirmed she had, thinking of the endless hours her father had made her practice altitude changes, always smooth, always controlled. She watched the navigation display, watching the distance to O'Hare tick down, watching the estimated time of arrival. The descent began smoothly, the autopilot pitching the nose down gently, the vertical speed showing a comfortable 800 feet per minute rate. Maya monitored everything, her eyes moving across the instruments in the scan pattern her father had taught her. Airspeed, altitude, attitude, heading, navigation, systems. Always scanning, always checking, never fixating on one thing. Passing through 5,000 feet, descent rate 800 feet per minute, all systems normal, she reported, sounding more confident now, falling into the rhythm of flying. Captain Chen was impressed despite herself. This kid was reading instruments correctly, understanding the autopilot modes, using proper terminology, maintaining situational awareness. But landing was different. Landing was the hardest part of flying, where everything had to be perfect. Speed too fast and you'd overrun the runway. Too slow and you'd stall and crash. Approach angle wrong and you'd slam into the ground. 1,000 things could go wrong and experienced pilots sometimes messed up landings. How could an 11-year-old possibly do this? As they descended through 20,000 feet, Maya asked permission to move to the captain's seat. Captain Chen approved, and Mark carefully unbuckled the unconscious Captain Morrison and moved him to the observer seat, strapping him in securely. Maya climbed into the captain's seat, her small frame dwarfed by the leather chair designed for adults. She could barely see over the instrument panel, so Sarah brought pillows from first class and stacked them behind her. Her feet didn't reach the rudder pedals on the floor, so she adjusted the seat all the way forward until her toes could touch them. It felt wrong, being in this seat. This wasn't a simulator. In her garage, this was real. But her father had taught her that doubt kills pilots. You make a decision, you commit to it, you see it through. Chicago Center took over radio communications as they got closer, vectoring them through the airspace, keeping other aircraft well clear. Every controller in the region knew what was happening. An 11-year-old girl was trying to land a passenger jet. It was impossible. It was insane. It was the most incredible thing any of them had ever heard. In the O'Hare Tower, dozens of airport staff had gathered to watch, emergency vehicles staging near runway 28 right, ambulances ready, fire trucks positioned, everyone praying they wouldn't be needed. Captain Chen talked Maya through extending the flaps, those big panels on the wings that increased lift and drag, allowing the plane to fly slower without stalling. Speed is critical now, Maya. You need to slow to 250 knots. Watch your airspeed like a hawk. Maya adjusted the autopilot speed setting, feeling the plane slow, feeling the slight rumble as the flaps extended, exactly like the simulator. 5 degrees of flaps, then 10, then 15, the plane configurating for landing. They were 20 miles from O'Hare now, lined up on the runway, descending through 8,000 feet. Maya could see the city spreading out below, Lake Michigan gleaming in the sun, the airport ahead with its crossed runways. Captain Chen's voice guided her through every step, lowering the landing gear, that distinctive thunk and rumble as the wheels extended into the wind, 3 green lights confirming they were locked down. More flaps, slowing to 180 knots, then 160, the plane mushier now, closer to its stall speed, everything happening faster. At 5 miles out and 3,000 feet, Maya disconnected the autopilot. Her hands gripped the control yoke, feeling the pressure of the hydraulic systems, feeling the airplane through the controls the way her father had taught her. The plane was hers now. She was flying it manually, no computer helping, just her and the machine. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might explode. Her hands were sweating inside her hoodie sleeves. But her father's voice was in her head, steady and calm. Trust your training, Maya. You know how to do this. Just like we practiced. The runway was ahead, a long strip of concrete that looked impossibly small, impossibly far away. Captain Chen was talking her down, giving altitudes and speeds, coaching every second. 2,000 feet, Maya, speed 150 knots, you're doing great. 1,500 feet, looking perfect. Throttle back a little more. 1,000 feet, start thinking about your flare. The flare was the most critical part, that moment right before touchdown where you had to raise the nose just enough to bleed off the last of your speed and set down smoothly. Too early and you'd balloon back up into the air. Too late and you'd slam down hard enough to collapse the landing gear. Maya was so scared she could barely breathe. The ground was rushing up, the runway filling her windscreen, concrete and painted lines and lights getting bigger and bigger. 500 feet, 400, 300. The radio altimeter was calling out heights in the cockpit. 250 feet. 200 feet. Captain Chen's voice was steady. You're looking good, Maya. Small corrections. Keep your wings level. 100 feet. Maya's hands were tiny on the control yoke but steady. Her father had taught her this 1,000 times. Trust your sight picture. Trust your training. Don't look at the instruments now, look outside, judge your height by looking at the runway. 50 feet. 40 feet. Maya started pulling back on the yoke, raising the nose, flaring. The runway was right there, so close. 30 feet. 20 feet. Throttle to idle, Maya, Captain Chen said calmly. Maya pulled the throttle levers back, cutting power to the engines. The plane was floating now, those last few feet, nose up, wings level, speed bleeding off. 10 feet. 5 feet. She held the yoke back, holding the nose up, waiting for the main wheels to touch first, just like her father taught her. Perfect technique, perfect control. The main landing gear kissed the runway with barely a bump. Maya held the nose up as speed bled off, then let it settle as the nose wheel touched down. She immediately deployed the speed brakes, pulled the thrust reversers to reverse engine power, and stood on the brakes with all her 11-year-old weight, feeling the massive jet decelerating hard, slowing from 140 knots to 80 to 60 to 40. The runway was long and they had plenty of room. At 20 knots she let off the brakes and guided the plane toward the taxiway, steering with the rudder pedals her feet could barely reach. Flight 447, you are down and safe, Chicago Tower said, and Maya could hear the emotion in the controller's voice. That was the best landing we've ever seen. You did it, Maya. You saved everyone. Captain Chen was on the radio too, her voice thick with tears. Maya Rodriguez, you are a pilot. A real pilot. Your father would be so proud of you. Maya couldn't speak, couldn't answer, her whole body shaking with relief and exhaustion and the overwhelming realization of what she had just done. She had landed a Boeing 737. She had saved 150 lives. She was 11 years old. Emergency vehicles surrounded the plane as she brought it to a stop on the taxiway. Paramedics rushed aboard to treat the unconscious pilots, finding them alive but in critical condition, later determining they had suffered severe food poisoning from contaminated crew meals that had caused them to lose consciousness. Both would recover fully after hospital treatment. But as the paramedics worked on Captain Morrison and First Officer Chen, the passengers were standing in the aisles cheering, crying, hugging each other, hugging Maya. The businessman who had doubted her picked her up in a bear hug, sobbing apologies. Sarah the flight attendant was crying so hard she couldn't speak. Mark just kept saying, "Thank you," over and over. The airport operations team and airline officials met them at the gate, ready to debrief what everyone was already calling a miracle. News crews were gathering outside, having heard the incredible story over emergency radio frequencies. An 11-year-old girl had landed a passenger jet alone and saved everyone aboard. It was impossible, but it had happened. Maya sat in the jetway, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her, shaking from the adrenaline crash, unable to quite believe it was real. She had actually done it. She had landed the plane. Captain Sarah Chen, the instructor pilot who had coached her from the ground, arrived at O'Hare within 2 hours and asked to meet Maya. When they finally came face to face, Captain Chen knelt down to Maya's level and looked her in the eye. "That was textbook perfect," she said. "The approach was stable, your speed control was perfect, and that landing was smoother than most of my students manage. Your father taught you well. He taught you to be a pilot." The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of Maya's training. Her home simulator setup was inspected by FAA officials who were shocked at its sophistication and accuracy, a professional-grade system that her father had built with the same software airlines used. Her logbooks showed over 3,000 hours of simulator time, practicing every procedure, every emergency, every type of landing in every condition. She had learned meteorology, navigation, aircraft systems, emergency procedures, radio communications, everything. Her father had literally trained her to be a commercial pilot, even though she was just a kid. The aviation community was divided. Some said she was a hero who did the impossible. Others said it was irresponsible that a child had been put in that position, that adults should have found another solution, even though everyone acknowledged there was no other solution. The FAA conducted interviews, reviewed every second of the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder, and ultimately concluded that Maya had likely saved every life aboard that aircraft through her knowledge, skill, and remarkable composure under pressure. Her actions were extraordinary, her training was exceptional, and her success was undeniable. Maya's aunt arrived from Chicago, rushing to the airport in tears, overwhelmed by what her niece had done. Media requests flooded in from around the world wanting to interview the 11-year-old hero pilot. Airlines wanted to honor her, aviation organizations wanted to recognize her, everyone wanted to know her story. But Maya just wanted to go home. She was tired, scared, overwhelmed by everything that had happened. She had saved 150 people, but all she could think about was her father and how much she wished he could have seen it, how much she wished he could have told her she did good. The passengers of Flight 447 never forgot her. They stayed in touch through social media, sending birthday wishes, graduation congratulations as years passed, letters thanking her for giving them more time with their families. The businessmen who had doubted her sent flowers every year on the anniversary of the flight. Sarah, the flight attendant, nominated Maya for every aviation award she could find. Many of the passengers attended Maya's high school graduation years later, wanting to see the little girl who saved them grow up. The unconscious pilots, Captain Morrison and First Officer Chen, both fully recovered and returned to flying. They met with Maya after their release from the hospital, two professional aviators humbled by what a child had accomplished. Captain Morrison gave her his captain's wings from his uniform and told her she had earned them more than anyone he'd ever met. "You're a natural pilot," he said. "When you're old enough, you're going to make an amazing airline captain." First Officer Chen simply said, "You saved my life. I'll never forget that." Maya kept flying, kept practicing on simulators, kept studying aviation with the same dedication her father had taught her. On her 16th birthday, she soloed a small airplane for the first time legally, though she had already landed a passenger jet 5 years earlier. She earned her private pilot license at 17, commercial license at 18, and by 21 she was applying to airlines. When she interviewed with the same airline that operated Flight 447, the hiring board was made up of pilots who knew her story, who had been in the tower that day or heard the radio traffic or read the incredible reports. They hired her immediately. At 23 years old, Maya Rodriguez became a first officer on Boeing 737s, flying the same type of aircraft she had landed alone at age 11. On her first commercial flight as a pilot, some of the passengers from Flight 447 had booked tickets specifically to fly with her, coming full circle. She wore her father's old pilot wings on her uniform next to her own, a reminder of everything he had taught her, everything she had learned, everything she had survived. The story of Flight 447 became legend in aviation circles, a tale told to student pilots about preparedness, knowledge, courage under pressure, and the importance of training. Maya Rodriguez became a symbol that capability isn't determined by age, that heroes can be any size, that when crisis strikes someone has to step forward no matter how impossible the task seems. She had been just an 11-year-old girl on a routine flight, carrying a backpack and gummy bears, looking like any other kid. But inside she carried her father's legacy, years of training, and the courage to do what nobody thought possible. She gave talks at aviation schools, sharing her experience, encouraging young people, especially young girls, to pursue flying, to never let anyone tell them they couldn't do something because of their age or size or gender. She established a scholarship in her father's name for children who wanted to learn aviation but couldn't afford lessons. She worked with the FAA on emergency procedures and training protocols, offering insights from her unique experience. She became a captain at 30, one of the youngest in her airline's history, and every time she sat in that left seat she thought of that terrible, wonderful day when she was 11 and scared and alone in a cockpit with 150 lives depending on her. The legacy of that flight lived on in everyone it touched. The passengers who survived went on to live full lives, seeing their children grow up, attending weddings and graduations and family gatherings they would have missed if not for an 11-year-old girl's courage. The pilots who had fallen unconscious flew safely for years afterward, always aware of how close they had come to disaster and how unexpectedly salvation had arrived. The controllers who guided Maya from the ground never forgot her voice on the radio, that small scared voice that had grown stronger and more confident with every passing minute. Captain Chen, who coached her through the landing, became a mentor and friend, proud to say she had been part of that incredible day. Maya never forgot the fear, the weight of all those lives, the overwhelming responsibility that should never have fallen on a child's shoulders. But she also never forgot the feeling of those wheels touching down, the joy of succeeding against impossible odds, the knowledge that her father's training had not been wasted. He had taught her to be a pilot not because he expected her to ever need those skills so young, but because he believed that knowledge was power and preparation was everything. He had given her tools that saved lives. He had given her confidence that carried her through terror. He had given her a gift that she now worked to pass on to others. Years later, when Maya was a captain with thousands of hours and a spotless safety record, a reporter asked her about that day and how she found the courage to do what she did. Maya thought about the question carefully before answering. "I didn't feel brave," she said. "I felt terrified. But my father taught me that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what needs to be done even when you're scared. Everyone on that plane could have died. I was the only one who could help. So I tried. That's all any of us can do when we're faced with something impossible. We try." The Boeing 737 that she had landed, tail number N447WA, remained in service for many more years. Pilots who flew it knew its history, and some said it was lucky, blessed by the miracle that had happened aboard. When it was finally retired from service, the airline donated it to an aviation museum where visitors could sit in the cockpit and see the instruments that 11-year-old Maya Rodriguez had used to save 150 lives. A plaque inside explained the story, honored her courage, and reminded everyone who read it that heroes come in all sizes and ages, that capability isn't about how old you are but about what you know and what you're willing to do when others need you. Maya's story spread far beyond aviation, becoming a symbol of human potential, of the power of education and preparation, of the importance of passing knowledge from one generation to the next. Parents pointed to her example when telling their children that they could accomplish anything with dedication and learning. Teachers used her story to encourage students to pursue knowledge deeply, to master skills that might seem beyond them. Young people facing their own impossible challenges remembered that an 11-year-old girl had landed a passenger jet and saved lives, and they found strength in that memory. On every anniversary of that flight, Maya visited her father's grave and told him about the lives that continued because of what he taught her. She told him about the passengers from Flight 447 who sent her photos of their grandchildren, who thanked her for giving them more time. She told him about the young pilots she was training who looked at her with the same wonder she once looked at him. She told him that his lessons had echoed across years and miles and lives, that his love had been transformed into salvation for people he never met. And she thanked him, always thanked him, for believing that an 11-year-old girl could learn to be a pilot. The morning that Maya Rodriguez became a hero, she had been just another child on just another flight, invisible and underestimated like children so often are. But when crisis struck and adults fell and terror gripped everyone aboard, she became what her father had trained her to be, what she had practiced so many hours to become, what she needed to be to save lives. She became a pilot. Not despite being 11 years old, but because she had 11 years of love and learning and dedication behind her. She proved that age is just a number when knowledge and courage meet necessity. The 150 souls aboard Flight 447 lived because an 11-year-old girl refused to give up, trusted her training, and did the impossible. Their story, her story, remains a testament to what human beings can achieve when they combine knowledge with courage, when they refuse to accept that something cannot be done simply because it has never been done before. In the years following that incredible day, the Federal Aviation Administration created new protocols for dual-pilot incapacitation scenarios. Airlines revised their crew meal procedures to prevent contamination incidents. The industry changed because a child had been forced to do the impossible and had somehow succeeded. Maya received hundreds of letters from children worldwide who were inspired to pursue aviation or other dreams adults told them were impossible. She answered every letter personally, encouraging them to find their passion and pursue it with everything they had, because you never knew when that knowledge might save a life. Captain Sarah Chen, the instructor pilot who coached Maya through the landing, wrote a book about the experience detailing the technical aspects and aviation knowledge required. The book became required reading at pilot training schools. Captain Chen donated all proceeds to Maya's scholarship fund. The investigation revealed serious food safety breakdowns at the catering company. The company faced massive fines and restructured completely, implementing new safety measures that became industry standard. Maya's mother, Isabella Rodriguez, struggled with complex emotions after the incident. She was grateful her daughter survived and proud of her accomplishment, but also angry that her child had been put in such danger. She eventually found peace knowing Miguel had given their daughter exactly what she needed. Isabella became an advocate for aviation education for young people, working with Maya on the scholarship program. Chicago O'Hare installed a plaque commemorating the landing. Maya Rodriguez, age 11, saved 150 lives. Controllers told her story to trainees, inspiring the next generation of aviation professionals. The Federal Aviation Administration granted Maya a special commendation, formally acknowledging that her actions prevented catastrophic loss of life. The ceremony was attended by the Secretary of Transportation and all passengers who could make it. Maya stood on stage looking tiny next to the important adults and received a 5-minute standing ovation. She cried through the whole thing, overwhelmed and missing her father terribly. The Boeing company requested a meeting with Maya to discuss her experience flying their aircraft. Engineers and test pilots interviewed her extensively, amazed by her technical knowledge. Boeing incorporated some of her suggestions into their pilot training materials. Maya's school became famous and initially she struggled with the attention from classmates and teachers who treated her differently. She changed schools eventually, finding a place where she could be 11 years old again. But nothing was truly normal after Flight 447, and Maya learned to accept that her life was divided into before and after that day. Some aviation experts criticized the situation, arguing that Maya should never have been placed in the captain's seat. But others countered that there was no other solution, no choice except let Maya try or guarantee everyone died. Most eventually concluded that while the situation was far from ideal, Maya's training and success spoke for themselves. The simulator her father had built in their garage was eventually displayed at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum with a full explanation of Maya's story. Thousands of visitors sat in the same seat where she had practiced the landing that saved lives. Maya's story appeared in textbooks and educational materials, used to teach children about aviation, courage, and the importance of learning. She became an example in psychology classes studying stress response, in aviation courses studying emergency procedures, and in ethics classes discussing responsibility and capability. The media attention eventually faded. Maya granted occasional interviews on significant anniversaries, always emphasizing her father's role and redirecting attention to the importance of education. "I just did what I was trained to do," she would say. "My father was the real hero for teaching me. As Maya grew older and gained more flying experience, she developed deeper appreciation for what she had accomplished. She had done it with knowledge but without experience, understanding theory but never having felt a real plane respond to her inputs. Looking back as an adult pilot, she sometimes couldn't believe she had succeeded. It gave her compassion for every pilot facing emergencies. She became known in her airline as one of the calmest pilots in crisis situations. She had already faced the worst-case scenario before she even had a driver's license. Regular aviation emergencies felt manageable compared to being 11 and alone with 150 people depending on her. Maya trained the next generation of pilots with dedication, passing on technical knowledge and the mindset that had saved Flight 447. She taught that preparation was the difference between success and failure, that staying calm solved problems. Her students were inspired knowing their instructor had accomplished something legendary. On the 20th anniversary, the airline organized a reunion flight with original passengers, flown by Captain Maya Rodriguez. Retired Captain Morrison sat in the observer seat. When Maya landed perfectly, the cabin erupted in applause and tears. The celebration was emotional, passengers sharing stories of lives lived because of her, grandchildren born, dreams achieved. They gave her a photo album containing pictures from 20 years, all the happiness that existed because an 11-year-old knew how to fly. Captain Morrison told the crowd that Maya had saved his life and inspired him to be better. Every time he flew after that day he thought about her courage. First Officer Chen said he owed every moment since that day to a child who refused to let them die. Maya's daughters attended the reunion and heard the stories about their mother. They looked at her with new eyes, seeing not just their mother but a hero who had accomplished something extraordinary. The final words of this story belong to Maya herself, spoken at the 20th anniversary celebration, standing before the people she had saved, reflecting on the journey from that terrifying day to this moment of joy and gratitude. 20 years ago, I was 11 years old and absolutely terrified. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a little girl who missed her dad and didn't know if she could do what needed to be done. But my father taught me something important, something I want everyone here to understand, especially the young people. He taught me that heroes aren't people without fear. Heroes are people who act despite their fear, who do what must be done even when they don't know if they can, who try their best when trying is all they have left. Everyone on Flight 447 could have died that day, but we're all here now, living and loving and celebrating together. That's not because I was special or extraordinary. It's because I had been taught well, because I was prepared, because when the moment came I chose to try rather than give up. That's all any of us can do when we face our impossible moments. We try. We give everything we have. And sometimes, if we're lucky and prepared and determined, we succeed. My father gave me the tools to save your lives. You gave me the privilege of using them. Together we made a miracle. Thank you for letting me be part of your stories, and thank you for being part of mine. The story of 11-year-old Maya Rodriguez and Flight 447 will be told for generations, a tale of courage against impossible odds, of knowledge becoming salvation, of a child who proved that heroes come in all sizes and ages. It reminds us that the young people we sometimes dismiss or underestimate might possess extraordinary capabilities, that education and training can create miracles, that love expressed through teaching can echo across time to save lives long after the teacher is gone. 150 people lived because a father taught his daughter to fly, because a girl studied when she could have played, because a child found courage when adults fell. That is the legacy of Flight 447, and it will inspire people to learn, to prepare, and to never give up, for as long as the story is told.